Byline Audio.
Hello and welcome to the Byline podcast from the Byline Times. The Byline Times, it's what the papers don't say, what radio doesn't report, and what telly doesn't tell you. This time, how military drones, once used for surveillance, are now being used to hunt down and target civilians in Ukraine. Zarina Zabrisky is in Kherson, where dozens of people are thought to have died after being targeted in the last few weeks. Ukrainian officials believe that Russian operatives are committing war crimes by targeting civilians in this way. Zarina, welcome. This is a very disturbing story. I read your account of it in the Byline Times a couple of weeks ago, and there have been more developments since then, I know. Just talk me through exactly what's going on.
Hi, Adrian. Thank you for having us at such a difficult point in time anywhere in the world, including the UK. This story is so big and, as you said, disturbing that it does require our special focus. In essence, a horror movie, a bad sci-fi, Terminator-like, with drones equipped with guns, equipped with bombs, hunting humans. And honestly, I did not think that I will get to see it in my lifetime, other than on television. And when I have arrived in Kherson, which I know very, very well, but I was away for 2 months reporting from other parts of the front line, I have discovered this new and horrifying tactic. And very briefly, for those who are not familiar, Kherson is a frontline city located only 1 kilometer away from the Russian positions, only divided from the front by the river and the swampy area on the both banks of the river and some islands. And it has been pummeled by the Russian artillery, missiles, mortar, tanks, and the bigger types of drones called Shaheeds, Iranian-made and the Russian-made drones, for a very long time, for about 2 years already. And we thought that there wasn't anything that this city hasn't seen yet. We even had the element of the hybrid war where the dam, Novakhovka Dam, was blown up and there was a major flood leading to environmental disaster. However, this is something that has not been reported at all, and that has not been reported widely, I believe, from anywhere during this war. And we are talking about smaller type of drones. We're not talking about Shaheeds. We're talking about consumer models. They call the first-person view drones, FPV drones, or short FPVs, that are led by Mavics, which are also consumer model drones, meaning you can buy them on Amazon, you can buy them in the store, and usually people use it in a household, they use it for entertainment, for videography, say for weddings, and so forth. However, slightly re-equipped and reprogrammed, they turn into powerful lethal weapons. Mavic drones are surveillance drones that have better cameras, and so the operator sitting on the Russian-occupied so-called left bank of the Dnipro River can watch through the goggles and see the terrain and see the details. And it is leading the FPV drone, also called the suicide drone or kamikaze drone, which is carrying explosives. And so this tandem is moving along, making all sorts of sounds. Mavic is only making slight noise, and the FPV is very audible. As someone described it to me, it's hissing and buzzing, and people have been referring to it as to a swarm of bees, as a motorcycle far away, as an electric drill, lawnmower. You hear it from about 100 meters, 50 meters as they approach. And FPV drone also has a camera. It's just not as good. So the image that the operator of the FPV drone gets is not as clear as the operator of the Mavic drone. And so the Mavic drone operator sends a signal to the FPV drone operator to drop the explosive on the target. In the past, it's been known that they were targeting military, but now it has switched to civilians.
So, just so I understand this correctly, then, the first drone, which is an adapted consumer drone, because it's got such a sophisticated camera that can identify the target, and the secondary drone, which operates in tandem, then delivers this deadly payload, kills people.
That is correct. And the second drone can either do it by dropping the explosives or falling down with the explosives, exploding in the process.
And as you describe it, Zarina, in your article for the Byline Times, it's like a human safari, so that people who are terrified to leave their house, but who may need to leave their house in order to get basic provisions, are being tracked down one by one and picked off. Whether these are elderly people who feel they're too old to leave where they've grown up, whether they're people just going about their daily business in Kherson. These are not by any stretch military targets.
That is correct, Adrian. And I, at this point, spoke to about maybe 20 people on record and many more off the record, and they all confirmed that. Moreover, I've seen those drones. I've seen them following. I don't know if they were following me. I cannot confirm that, but I've seen them cruising over me in the sky, just as these other people. And I spoke to quite a few people who actually survived such attacks. And these are women, these are elderly women, children, bicyclists, as somebody said, you walk outside to walk a dog, or in fact, take out garbage. And people do recycling here in Kherson. They're very good about it. So I have an exclusive video from a security camera that caught a person taking out garbage who is hiding first from the drone and then runs away. And the drone is following this person as he runs, and then turns around and crashes into his former hiding place and blows up there.
You talk about a woman who had head injuries. She had shrapnel wounds to her legs. That was in a village just outside Kherson. A 57-year-old woman who was left with concussion, a leg wound, and blast injuries as well. But I mentioned at the start of this podcast, Zarina, in some cases, these are fatal. Dozens of people have been killed in this way.
Yes, and in the recent week, ever since the article was published, the numbers are on the rise. I reported, you can take a look on Twitter. I try to reflect the numbers. Every day, there are more and more attacks. Yesterday, there were 25 reported only, and about 5 people were injured in Antonivka, 2 in Kindika, and it goes area by area. A 12-year-old was injured yesterday in the village of Belozerka. There's so many at this point that it is hard to remember or mention them in one sentence.
And in your article, you quote Article 8 of the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, and a war crime includes intentionally directing attacks against the civilian population as such, or against individual civilians not taking direct part in hostilities. You're witnessing war crimes.
That is correct. And this is reflected and echoed by other conventions, by the addendum to the Geneva Convention, in the Rome Statute, and in basically any convention accepted by the civilized world.
And the drones are referred to by local people as skids?
Yes, a skid literally means a drop. And because these drones are dropping the explosives, they are called skids. So oftentimes you will hear this characteristic sound, like a very short bam, and somebody will say, oh, a skid. In fact, yesterday when I was interviewing 2 women, we had to hide, and I had to rush from a car into their house very quickly because it's in the area which is being constantly attacked. And as we were talking, there was a sound of skid.
And they sometimes do a dual drop as well, so that if the emergency services are called to an attack and they seek to assist people who've been injured in an attack, the emergency services then are themselves attacked by a drop.
Oh, yeah. It's called double tap, and it's happening all the time. In fact, it was happening before, and there would be artillery attacks followed by the first responders visit. And that's when the Russians would target this site again. I've been reporting from sites like this. Paul Conroy and I have been filming at sites like this. But this is a new development as they use drones for the first step and then follow up with the drones for the second one. In fact, only yesterday, an ambulance that arrived to help 5 people injured in Antonievka was damaged intentionally. And when we say purposefully, we know that because the operators can see the details. They can see very well. They see the people they are targeting. It's not blind. And that's what the representative of the military administration, Mr. Tolokonnikov, told me in an interview. Before, the Russian military were claiming that the civilian casualties are only an accident because the weapons are imprecise. They cannot claim it here. It's not possible.
And you mentioned the Dnipro River, which is all that separates Russian forces from Ukraine, and the Russians were beaten back and forced out of Kherson some months ago. But is it that proximity that makes these weapons so effective? Presumably, they don't work over a longer range.
Yes, that is correct. However, there's an added element to it, which I'm just learning about, and I have been interviewing experts on the subject, and I will follow up with a more detailed article because here we have the electronic warfare units that in general supposed to stop, to jam with the signal and prevent these drones, both Mavic and FPVs, from permeating the territory. However, we have here the issue of frequency changing. And it's complicated, and I'm not going to go into details here on this show. But in a nutshell, the frequency range can be changed. And once it's changed and broadened, the pre-programmed electronic warfare units are unable to jam the signal and stop these drones. And it became a game of cat and mouse where both sides are changing the frequency range. And at this moment, the Ukrainian air defense is not having enough capability and time to change or to find the frequency.
More generally, Zarina, how does it feel as though the war is going?
Well, this was certainly something new that kind of threw me off of the known course, and that's characteristic of the way the war is going. In fact, a few military that I spoke to, some officers I've been interviewing the other day on the field trip, were saying that the nature of the war in general and the nature of this war is constant change. And what we saw 2 months ago doesn't apply to the situation anymore. And this is not just the changes on the map that you could see where the Russians either grabbing more land or Ukrainians push them back. This is also the changes in technology. This is the war of the drones, more and more noticeably so. There are talks about artificial intelligence being installed on the drones, which will change the whole picture significantly. We're just not there yet, but we possibly are there. We just don't know it yet. There are also changes in supplies. Right now, we are in a, so to say, favorable stage where certain equipment is being delivered or reportedly is being delivered to Ukraine. And just today, President Zelensky mentioned that F-16s have now arrived to Ukraine. The location is unspecified. That should change the situation dramatically. And we are to see in the very nearest time what it will mean for the situation at the front. Also, we've been focusing on the southern direction, but there's a lot going on right now in the east and in the north. And the Russian army is pushing there in a Pokrovsk direction in Donbass. And this is a very important development because it's a major logistics hub. And we're not going to go into it in details, but the elevation situation there also important. So the eyes are on Donbass a lot ever since an offensive on the Kharkov region collapsed. Russia wasn't able to grab significant amount of land in the Kharkov region. So they are focusing on Donbass. And of course, if we speak about the geopolitical situation, we know that eyes are on the United States, where the presidential election will also decide, if not the fate of Ukraine, then the developments at the front.
Indeed, and the fear is that if Trump wins, that Ukraine may be forced in some way to accept a concession of territory in return for a peace, and a peace which many people who have observed President Putin over the years feel would not hold, would not be a long-lasting peace.
No, just yesterday I was talking to a few officers and soldiers, and they're adamant about not willing to go for the Potemkin village, for the circus of peace, because they've been through it so many times. And they very well know that this is just the time for the Kremlin to regroup, arrest, and then attack again. And I've heard the same sentiment from a lot of civilians too. In fact, when I was in Sumy, which is the area in the east, also very, very close to the border, there was a young lady from Bakhmut, a place that was pulverized and turned to ashes by the Russian army, and she lost her home and everything she had. She said, people in the occupied territories are waiting for us to liberate them. There are Ukrainians there. And if we leave them there, we are leaving them to slow death. And her words really stayed with me.
We saw recently the release of 24 prisoners as a result of negotiations between the United States. It's been seen as a victory for Joe Biden. Evan Gershkovich and Paul Whelan released from Russia. Russia got prisoners back in exchange. Is that apparent thaw in the Cold War between Russia and the United States being taken in any way as a positive sign in Ukraine?
I wish I could say that. I'm afraid I cannot. There's an interesting moment here that I think escapes most of the observers, because I've seen a few press conferences and interviews with Russian citizens who were exchanged. And I'm not talking about Ivan Gershkovich or Paul Whelan. I'm talking about Ilya Yashin and Vladimir Karamurza, Dmitry Pivovarov, who are the representatives of the Russian opposition. And they basically shocked, if not the global community, then the community in Ukraine, by stating that they want to go back and that they would like to stop or weaken or loosen the sanctions against Russia. One thing that escapes people here, and I'm talking from my experience of interviewing a lot of people coming out of the Russian prison. I spoke, if you might remember, Adrian, to people tortured in the Russian jail in the occupied territories. I also interviewed about 12 years ago the Pussy Riot members who were just released from the Russian prison. And what struck me is how traumatized, how mentally unstable these people are. And there is a thing such as Stockholm syndrome, which is real. And I do not think that it is in any way reasonable or even humane to interview these people in public and make them go on air the day after they landed after 2 years in Russian prison. We cannot trust their opinions. They need recovery. They need psychological help. So in that way, it's probably a good thing that they were released, but Ukrainians are too upset and too much in pain to take the psychological details and nuances in consideration. They're just simply angry.
Zarina, thank you so much, and really appreciate you updating a very troubling story. And the story of these drones, which I've not seen reported anywhere else, I think is one that deserves a much wider audience. So please stay safe, and give my best wishes to your colleague Paul as well, who's spoken to us previously on the Byline podcast and writes as well for Byline Times. Thank you so much. And we will, of course, be touching base with you again very soon. Before we go, just to remind you that this podcast is part of a brilliant cluster of podcasts which are now available via bylineaudio.com. There is Utter Bollocks with John Mitchinson and Otto English, myth busting at its finest and funniest. And we've now got Travel Through Americana with Hardeep Matharu and Bonnie Greer. A couple of great episodes of that now available to listen. James Baldwin and the Discontents. Be a good name for a band, wouldn't it? But James Baldwin, the great American writer, dissected. And Hardeep and Bonnie also dissect the notion of make America great again. So that's Travel Through Americana, Utter Bollocks, and more. If you head over to bylineaudio.com, you can listen to all of our podcasts, including an ad-free version of this one if you take out a premium membership. So go on, give it a try. My thanks to Harvey White, who has helped produce this episode of the Byline podcast. We'll be with you again very soon. But for now, thanks for listening and goodbye.